Communication in the Middle East. Well, the first thing I'd say is that you can't impose a Western-style template on the Middle East. It has its own culture, it has its own institutions, and those are very different to the way that the West operates. I think if you look at the announcement by Dubai that it was possibly about to default on its Islamic bond, that was announced the day before the Eid al-Adha holiday. So that meant that there was 4 days after that announcement to create a vacuum into which the press poured all the speculation that they wished to do. Now in the West you probably wouldn't do that, but in the Arabic world there is still a sense that they would rather not confront the truth of these matters, and perhaps rather not go too hard into the detail and be transparent in their communications. They would rather put out a statement and then hope for the best. In the meantime, the slings and arrows from all the journalists tend to hit home, I'm afraid. So at the moment the issue is taking Western best practice and also ensuring that you can blend that with the Islamic way of communicating. There's some things that I think are particularly difficult to embed in Islamic communications. One of them is full disclosure. If you're trying to confront an issue and you're trying to speak honestly about what that issue has grown into and where the seeds of it grew up from, if you're trying to reassure investors, for one, that you know how you're handling this and that you can explain why something has happened, it's very difficult to ensure that your client, perhaps in the Gulf region, is fully on board with that. It's not really that they won't accept the principles of Western best practice. It's more about the actual practice of them. So it's less about the theory and more about actually convincing them that if they follow what you advise, they will be better off in the long run. But it's a learning process. It's a learning process for us, and it's a learning process for people in the Middle East. Yep. I think that these best practice principles are transferable. The Middle East has come a long way in a very short period of time. For instance, they didn't really have the societal development that comes with an industrial revolution, for instance. So in a short period of time, they're going from a culture that was based on tribalism in many ways, and not a democratic, transparent system. And they are trying to share information, and that in the Gulf is not something that really has a history. It was more that there were a few people in charge and they did what they needed to do. Now, if you're trying to engage with stakeholders and you're trying to ensure that you get a message out to all your audiences, there is a reluctance to do that, because it takes bravery to do that. It takes a lot of guts to put yourself out there and say this is the reason why this has happened. And if you're not used to doing that, then it's a big leap of faith. Well, I've been going there since about 2005, but I've only been based there for 18 months. But I've also worked in Jordan, in Lebanon, and across the Gulf. And there are differences. There are differences. The Levant is different from the Gulf. The United Arab Emirates is different from Kuwait. It's not something that you can treat as one subject matter. Basically, it's all about the opportunity. We had an opportunity to work with Kuwait National Petroleum Company. We also have a number of other clients in Kuwait, large families who require our advice on many different issues, be they legal issues, presentational issues, financial issues. In order to handle those clients, I really had to be there, because if you're based in London, you can't be. Your client service suffers. And also, I'm doing a 3-year program at KNPC, a 3-year CSR program and strategic media program. And that really means that I have to embed myself within the team and run a series of other teams focusing on different aspects of creating a true world-class CSR program. To do that, I really have to lead from the front and be there amongst them. I mean, there isn't the communication setup there is not so primitive that there is a need for a great watershed moment. It's more about a process of evolution where you get to know the client and they get to understand why you are telling them what to do, and you're doing it with the best will in the world because you want them to benefit from your advice. It takes a while for you to sort of get to the comfort zone, whereby you are giving the advice that you think they want to hear, and you're giving it in the way that you think that they want to hear it. So it's a dialogue and it's a relationship. You have to get through that period, and after that it's just a question of being disciplined in your project management and making sure that you take it to every new stage. so that you can show that you're delivering for your client. I think you have to respect the fact that you have to make progress incrementally. You have to do it, you have to be patient, and you have to ensure that when you do it, you allow mistakes to be made so that you can then point to those mistakes and say, here's how you could have improved it. If you get exasperated, or if you say, well, this is not how I would have done it, that doesn't really take you anywhere. There's no magic bullet. It's just all about trying to understand your client and trying to understand that the process that you've embarked on is one that you have to control with them. The only difference really is the fact that you're dealing with a society that is largely tribal, or else is based on a rather small power base at the top, which may not have a broad understanding beneath it. This is the case in Saudi and perhaps Jordan. And you're dealing with institutions that don't behave in the same way perhaps as Western institutions behave. You have to find a way through that, and it's all about the sophistication of your stakeholder management, really.
On the one hand, there is communication, which is words, which is information, which is actually nothing. I mean, it's not material. And on the other hand, you have oil.
This is a very good question. The fact is that if you're an oil company in a place like Kuwait, you are interested in pipeline diameters, and you are interested in pounds and pence, or dinars rather. You're interested in large engineering infrastructure, and you're interested in the mechanics of getting the oil to the ultimate client. You're not really interested in CSR, the environment, and possibly not interested in community relations so much as your paramount concern, which is to turn a profit. Now that is changing. In the past I would say that used to be true, but the management at KNPC are different. They are more enlightened, and they see that if you really want to produce oil, even though what you're doing is producing oil that will go back into the state revenues and ensure that everybody has a good quality of life, you have to make a direct connection between what you do and improving the life of the community, because that gives you the license to operate. That gives you permission to build another refinery next to areas where people might not want you to build it. That gives you the opportunity to state your case that you're reducing the sulfur parts per million, and you're doing it not for an economic advantage but for an environmental dividend. What we're trying to do is craft those messages, and the basis for that is producing a world-class CSR report. So what we're looking to do is produce a credible report that the leadership can point to and show that they have a major concern for the people of Kuwait.
Communication is?
2 words to competitive advantage. Communication really changing the real world. Obama's soaring rhetoric changed the world because it brought the first black president of the United States to power. I would say that a lot of people would say that that was empty rhetoric now on the basis that his administration is in trouble. I would say any good comms done around a crisis to limit the impact of that crisis is probably some of the hardest comms work. There were many instances of good crisis communications that I've seen and worked on, and many instances of bad crisis communications. If you get it right, it can save a company. If you get it wrong, it can doom a company.
Do you think a forum like that should be a traditional way?
I think it should, for many reasons. I think we really need to justify ourselves as communicators, especially in a time when there's not a huge amount of money to go around. And we have to ensure that what we deliver is not just a nebulous idea of advice and counsel, but is measurable outcomes, deliverables, milestones, outputs. I think we have to be our own project managers, and I think that we have to say to a client, this is what we will deliver, this is what we will deliver by when. And we have to become more like any other industry or discipline, like accountants, like lawyers. So that's what we have to do. So yes, I think it should happen more. I think it should have a higher profile. I think it should happen immediately after Davos. And I think it's got a great future.